Good afternoon, everybody, and a really big warm welcome to this September meeting of the Divorce Support Club with me, Claire Black, and Lauren Preedy. I'll let Lauren introduce herself quickly now before I get going on the main topic for today.
Thank you, Claire. Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. As you may or may not know, I am Lauren Preedy. I'm the head of the Divorce and Relationships team at Ian Walker Family Law. And Claire and I have been running this Divorce Support Club for a number of months now, covering all different types of topics. And as we always say, any feedback or anything you'd like us to cover, then please do get in touch. And this is a space where we can talk about legal matters, but also Claire is a wealth of knowledge of different things of coping through the divorce process. And today's topic is getting divorce ready. So I'll hand back to Claire.
Thank you very much, Lauren. Thank you very much. So just very briefly to introduce myself and the DSC. So I'm Claire Black. I'm a specialist divorce coach. I work exclusively with people going through separation, divorce and breakup. Sometimes they're married, sometimes they're not. And my goal is to help you move through the process with dignity, with strength, with confidence. And we set up the DSC, I think it's almost 2 years ago now, Lauren, to provide—
Time flies.
To provide something just that little bit extra to the legal service that Ian Walker Family Law provide, of course. And we meet monthly, everybody is welcome. And so it's really good to see you all here today. I'm going to share my screen. As I do that, down the bottom there are, if you want to ask any questions, please do that in the chat box or via the Q&A. If you want to be anonymous and not have your name pop up, there are options just to email or, sorry, not email, chat with or ask a question of the panelists, and that will just go to Lauren and I. So please feel free to ask any questions as we go through. So I'm just going to share my screen. And make sure that you can see both of us still. Perfect. Okay, Lauren, can you give me a thumbs up when you can see it? Brilliant. Okay, so welcome everybody. Thank you very much. So as I said, I'm Claire Black, breakup and divorce coach. I'm a master NLP practitioner and a former lawyer. I'm a divorced single mum of 2 teenage boys, and I'll tell you a bit more about that in a minute. And then I'm also the author of a book, Breakup from Crisis to Confidence. So I can move the page along. It's not going to work. Okay. There we go. Okay. But the DSC has these main aims, 7 of them, to help you concentrate on you rather than your ex, to shift your focus onto you and what you can do, to become calm, to get clarity, to focus on those things that you can control, to see options and choices, to communicate more effectively, and also to create a new and vibrant future. And we offer all sorts of sessions of concentrating on various different aspects of those pillars of our offering. But today we're going to talk about getting divorce ready. Now, I know from my own experience and that of my clients that divorce can be one of the most traumatic things that you can go through in life, second only to the death of a loved one. It can be really messy, it can be painful, it can be difficult. The emotions are very up and down. It can be extraordinarily tiring and really, really stressful, a bit like a train wreck sometimes. So what I want to do is share a few strategies with you, information and suggestions of things that can help you put your train back on the tracks. And I thought it might be useful to start a little bit by telling you a little bit of my story and how I came to this. So I've been divorced twice. My first divorce was very sudden. My husband told me one evening in the middle of Holby City that he had met somebody else and that our marriage for him was over. So our children were upstairs at the time. They were 3 and 1. They were fast asleep and I went into shock. The next few months are a bit of a blur, but over time I took back control of my life. I decided what actions I wanted to take, and I rebuilt myself a completely new future. My second divorce was very different. I got remarried again 6-7 years ago, I think, and at 48, I decided that this wasn't for me anymore, and so I made the decision this time to end my marriage. So I've I've been through 2 divorces from completely different angles, one from being the person who was betrayed and completely lost, and the second time from being the person who made the very difficult decision to end a marriage. And I know that nobody goes into that decision easily. So that's just to give you some sort of background as to where my experience comes in. You might recognise some of these feelings, perhaps. You might be feeling them right now, or you might notice that every day you feel different things. These are a collection of all the feelings that I felt when I went through both my divorces, and also the kinds of words that my clients use when they come and tell me how they feel. And it's really important when you're going through divorce to understand the process that you're going through. I'll just move a picture of me and Lauren. There we go. So when you're going through a divorce, there's a healing or grieving cycle to go through. And that's what I wanted to start with. What you can expect that journey to look like emotionally. So whether your divorce or your separation was your choice or not, you're going to go through this process. And I wanted to talk through each stage separately. So the first stage is often denial. So when I was going through my first divorce, that was the immediate thing that happened to me. I went into shock. This stage is really acute if your divorce has not been your choice, but it's your brain protecting you from pain. So you might have thoughts like, this can't be happening to me, it's not real, I'm going to wake up tomorrow morning and everything will have gone back to normal. And that's absolutely normal. This is your brain trying to protect you from the pain. If you've chosen your divorce, then you have probably already been through this phase. It's that phase of, it's not that bad, it will all be okay, I can manage this, perhaps I don't need to do this, that kind of thing. The second stage is anger. And this could be anger that's directed at others, it could be directed at your ex, it could be directed at the situation, and sometimes it might be directed at yourself. Now, anger gives you energy. It's a very high energy emotion to feel, but you can get stuck there. And it can sometimes lead you to do things perhaps that you might regret later. And it's kind of typically the kind of thoughts of, how dare he or she do this to me, or I hate him or her, those kind of thoughts. The next stage is bargaining. And again, bargaining is your brain trying to protect you from the pain by coming up with all kinds of things that you could have done or could do differently. It helps to postpone the confusion, the sadness, the helplessness and the hurt. And it's a way for your brain to try and take back some kind of level of control. So it might be thoughts like, and I remember these thoughts myself, if I'd been a better wife, if I had been funnier, sexier, then he or she wouldn't have left. And if you made the decision to ask for the divorce, you might start to doubt it in this phase. And I also recognise this. So you might be thinking, is this really the right decision to have made? What would happen if I went back? Could I do things differently? Would things change? Sometimes one partner will make all kinds of promises to change in this phase to try to get the familiar relationship back. The next stage is depression. This is kind of when reality really sinks in, and that phase can be really overwhelming. It's when you might not want to get out of bed in the morning, you might want to cry under your duvet, you want to eat lots of chocolate maybe. It's really, really important to look after yourself during this phase, to make sure that you're eating, to make sure that you try and get some sleep, to make sure that you get a little bit of exercise, and to talk to other people perhaps. Again, it's a normal part of going through a breakup. So please believe that just because you're feeling depressed as you go through your divorce, this doesn't mean you're going to be suffering from depression forever. This is a normal reaction to going through this transition. And finally, acceptance. Now, acceptance doesn't necessarily mean that you're happy about what happened, but it does mean you accept that it happened, you can live with it, and you have hope and motivation to create a new future moving along from it. Now, the important things to remember about these phases are that they aren't linear. You're not going to go from denial to anger, through bargaining, into depression and out to acceptance. It just doesn't work that way. Everybody's journey will be totally different. You will probably find that you swirl around these phases, perhaps even on a daily basis or an hourly basis, or even minute by minute sometimes, and it can be really confusing. So I found it really helpful to know that I was on this curve, that the things I was feeling were completely normal, and that I would one day feel better. And it also meant but I didn't feel alone because I knew that what I was feeling was absolutely normal and to be expected. And this grieving cycle is really, really important, because if you don't grieve, then it's really hard to move on freely. You will carry that weight with you. So rather than taking that grief with you into new relationships, deal with it now. One day, one step at a time. So in order to move through that cycle, we need to identify and acknowledge how we feel. And this is really important. So the feelings that you have are yours. They're yours to feel. They're different to other people's. They're individual to you. They're different for everybody. They can be intense. They can be overwhelming. They might be contradictory. So, for example, I remember feeling both relief and sadness all at the same time some days when I was going through my second divorce, in particular. Our emotions are our body's way of communicating with us. They're our subconscious responses to events, and they can really hijack our logic. They can send us into fight, flight, freeze mode, and that's not always very useful in divorce. If you go into fight mode, then you end up in high conflict potentially. If you go into flight mode, then you run away and perhaps you don't deal with everything. And if you go into freeze, then sometimes perhaps you agree to things that perhaps aren't in your best interests. Now, I always think emotions are like visitors knocking at the door. So they come and they knock on your door, and if you don't let them in, they knock louder and they knock louder and they knock louder, and eventually they burst through. So I often use this rule with my clients to help them identify how they feel right now, or how they felt when a particular thing happened, or when something triggered an emotion within them. Because the first thing to do with your emotions is always to identify them. Know what it is that you're feeling. Once you know what it is and you can give it a name, quite often it helps to dissipate that feeling. Anger in particular is a really interesting one. It's got quite a big area on this chart, because anger can hide a multitude of other things. I always think of anger being a bit like an iceberg. So underneath the anger, there may be pain, there may be humiliation, there may be shame perhaps, or hurt, or fear, or feeling disrespected. And it's really useful to identify what those feelings underneath are, because then you can think about what you need to communicate and what you need to say to get through them. Another really useful thing to remember about your feelings, once you've acknowledged them, is that they're always transitory. They always pass. None of them hang around forever. And so I often help my clients to surf their feelings. And it's a really useful strategy that you can use when you're feeling a really strong emotion perhaps rise. If you imagine that you are a surfer and you're paddling your board out to sea, paddling, 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 and you can see a wave coming towards you. And that wave might be big, it might be small, it might be breaking. But the important thing is to identify what that wave is. So is that a wave of sadness? Is it a wave of humiliation? Is it a wave of anger? Name it, and then ride it. So you could try and push your board through it, or go round it, or over the top of it, but those are likely to end up with you in the water. So turn your board, imagine yourself riding that wave to the shore, and then when you arrive on the shore, you can sit, you can feel the sun on your back, you can dry off, and then you can decide what you want to do next. And you can notice that that feeling has died down. Another really helpful mantra I found going through my own divorces and with lots of my clients: when you feel a really strong emotion rising, stop, breathe, and think before you respond. Now, the breathing is really important here, because breathing will take oxygen back into your brain. It will help soothe that emotional response that you're having, and it will enable you to bring your logical brain back on side so that you can start to think, what do I need to say here? And it might be that you need to say, I need a break. I need to stop talking about this for now. Can we come back to it later? Or it might be to stop writing that very angry email in response and think, okay, I need to leave this for 24 hours. I need to sleep on it before I reply. And this little mantra got me through a lot of situations where I could have exploded, but didn't. And I know that it helps a lot of my clients. So onto some practical strategies that you can start to use to help you get ready for your divorce. The first thing that's really, really important is to get your support network up and running and know who's who within it. So just some examples here. So legal advice, get some specific advice on your options, because everybody's divorce is different. Your friends may be saying, well, when I got divorced, X and Y and Z, or this is the lawyer I recommend because they were able to do this and that and the other for me. Look at your divorce as your divorce only and get specific legal advice on your position. Laura and I will talk a little bit later, I think, about how to choose your divorce lawyer and the sorts of questions that you might want to ask the first time that you meet them. Secondly, get your emotional support in place. So that might be a therapist, it might be a coach. You may decide you don't need it and you can manage with perhaps some books and so on. But make sure that you've got that emotional support in place if you need it, because divorce isn't just a legal journey, it's an emotional journey as well. And in my experience, it's the emotions and the heightened emotions and the strength of those emotions that can really push things off course and lead to some of the high conflict situations. And then friends and family. These are going to be really, really important. So it's really vital that you choose them really carefully. So I always talk about radiator and drain people. So spend time with your radiators. Your radiators are those people who help you to feel good. They give you what you need. They're supportive, but not intrusive. And they're kind. Some of my radiators had different things that they offered. So I had one friend who used to give me breakfast on a regular basis. I had another friend who would help by looking after the children if I needed to do something. I had another friend who could mend a tap. So you'll have different friends who you go to for different things. Make a list of them so that when you're stuck and you don't know what to do, you can go to your list and it's there easily for you. And one really important friend to always have, who's your 3 a.m. friend? Who's the friend who at 3 o'clock in the morning when things feel really awful, who you can phone? You may never need to, but just knowing that that person is there can be really comforting. And in fact, I remember on many occasions lying in bed thinking, my 3 a.m. friend was called Sam. So what would Sam advise me to do right now? Was my question that I would ask myself in the middle of the night. And then there are some people to avoid. So avoid those people who you leave feeling drained, the energy vampires, those who suck your energy from you. Avoid the drama llamas. Those are the people who really, they just want to know what's going on because they want to gossip about it, or they get a thrill out of seeing that perhaps your life is more difficult than theirs. These are people to avoid. And the if I were you brigade. So those people who say, well, if I were you, I would chop all the legs off his trousers, or if I were you, I would key the car. Avoid them because they're not you, they're not in your situation, and they're not the people who have to deal with the consequences of anything that you do following their advice. Not on the slide here, but I would also add something about work colleagues. So I think it's really important to let somebody, at least somebody at work, know what's happening and what you're going through. And I was talking to a client yesterday, actually, who was saying that once he had opened up a little bit at work, he discovered that all these other people around him had also been through a divorce or were going through a divorce or were unhappy. And actually that meant that he felt less alone and more productive and more able to get on with his work. So do confide in somebody at work and see what support they can offer you. One more thing on friends is to set boundaries with your friends. You may not want to talk about your separation with everybody. You may not want to answer all their questions, and that's okay. You don't have to tell everyone about everything that's going on, and you don't even have to talk about it if you don't want to. And in fact, that's sometimes a good thing, because the more you talk about your divorce, the more you answer their questions and go into the nitty-gritty detail, the more you feel those things. So it might be that you start to think about, how can I tell my story differently as well with your friends? So how can I concentrate not on the stuff that's really awful? How can I concentrate on the stuff that I'm proud of? How can I concentrate on what I've managed to do for myself and tell your friends about that instead? So set some boundaries around what you're willing to talk about and what you want to share with people. And then it's really important right at the beginning to set your intentions. How do you want to behave through this? What outcome do you want to get? And I don't mean legal outcome in this question, I mean emotional outcome. Where do you want your relationship to be with your ex? in 6 months, in a year, in 5 years. So personally, my 2 divorces, I had very different intentions. So the first one, my intention was that I wanted to make sure we could co-parent successfully. I wanted to make sure that when my children get married, we could sit at the same table if that's what they wanted. I never wanted my children to be in the position of having to choose between their mum and their dad on their wedding day for who's going to sit next to them. My second divorce, though, was very different. We don't have any children together. So my desired outcome then was to have as dignified and civilized a divorce as possible. And then we don't actually need to have very much contact with each other again after that at all. So set your intentions based on where you want to get to, and keep that right in the front of your mind all the time. So whenever you're having a meeting or a conversation, if you can think about where you want to get to, and then ask yourself, is what I'm about to say going to take me nearer to or further away from that? And again, that kept me very much on the straight and narrow, and I know is really helpful for a lot of my clients. You can do this separately as well in terms of if you're a parent and you have children, in terms of your co-parenting relationship. Where do you want that to be in, say, 5 years' time? How do you want that to feel? How do you want that to look? And then keep that again at the forefront of your mind. Fundamental to everything is control, and what you can, what you can't control. So on this little diagram in the middle in the blue are all the things that you can control. You can control your words, you can control your actions, your behaviours, your reactions, your feelings, your decisions, your body language. What you can't control is in this orange circle on the outside. You can't control other people's thoughts and words and actions and behaviours and reactions. So a really good question to be asking yourself whenever you're thinking, oh gosh, I don't know what to do here, what part of this can I control? And if you realise that you're trying to control somebody else or influence somebody else, not often your ex, you might be saying, I just wish my ex would understand this, or I just wish they would stop doing that. That's in that orange zone of frustration. So come right back, what can I control here? And it might be that you can control asking them to do something differently, but you can't actually make them do it. And then maybe you need to think about something different approach to take, or a different thing to say, perhaps to help move things forward. And this extends to small things too. So a few things that you can control. So for example, and these will all affect your feelings, you can control what you watch on television. So maybe it's time to ditch the really heavy dramas about breakups and about romantic liaisons, and watch something funny. Watch something that's going to help you to relax. What music you listen to. So perhaps it's time to ditch the very sad love songs and listen to something that's a little bit more upbeat, or something that you know makes you feel good. You can absolutely control what you look at and also what you say on social media. So if you find yourself constantly looking at where your ex is, what your ex is doing, who they're with, stop. Because it's like torture. It's like picking a scab, and it's only going to make the wound worse. So although it feels really hard to do, I always advise my clients to stop following their exes on social media, and also to be very careful about what you put on social media. And perhaps Lauren might expand on that a little bit later, how that can sometimes backfire. We've already said you can control who you spend time with. You can also control what you wear. And I found this really helpful when I was going through my divorce. So whenever I had to go and see my ex-husband drop the children off, I made sure that I was wearing clothes that made me feel good, that made me walk tall, that made me feel more confident. Because you can dress for how you want to feel, rather than dressing for how you do actually feel sometimes in the morning. When you get up and you feel ill and you feel sad and depressed, if you put on your mankiest tracksuit, you're going to feel even more depressed. But if you put on something that has a bright colour or makes you feel confident, you will start to feel better. And then the questions that you ask in your head. Now, you may find that you're asking kinds of questions like, why is this happening to me? Why is he doing this to me? Or why is she behaving in that way? Change those questions when you find yourself asking them. Questions that start with why usually go down a rabbit hole. So start to ask yourself different questions. For example, what might be the most helpful thought I could have right now? What can I do now that I couldn't do before? Or if I knew, what is the tiny, tiny upside in all of this? Where is the glimmer of light? And those questions will lead you in a totally different direction. And I will suggest to my clients that when they discover a question that really works for them, write it up on a post-it note, stick it on the fridge, use it whenever you need to. So all of those things you can control. And once you start looking at those, quite often you'll realise that actually you can control more than you think. Okay, so my next tip is knowledge is power. So get clarity. Get clarity on your financial position, get clarity on your legal position, and also get clarity on the legal process. And Lauren will tell us a little bit more about that in a moment. Because with clarity, you can make informed choices and decisions. So clarity, I believe, is the antidote to overwhelm. So when you're feeling overwhelmed, you don't know what's happening, everything feels really uncertain, ask for help, get clarity on what your options are so that you can make a conscious choice about what you do next. And then choice is better than no choice. So I fundamentally believe that we always have choice about how we respond. You may not have a choice about what's happened to you in the way that I had no choice about my first divorce and what happened to me, but it's what you do with that that makes the difference. It's the choices you then make afterwards that make the difference. So I remember making 3 really important choices. The first one was to wallow in it for 3 months and give myself a deadline. The second choice was to work out what I could control and what I couldn't, and forget about the stuff I couldn't control. And the third one was to put a smile on my face. So I decided I was going to wear a smile, and actually that made me feel better. So you do have choices, although they may be simple, they can be really, really powerful. For example, you might find that going shopping on a Saturday morning in the same supermarket brings back memories of doing that with your ex-partner. So change the supermarket, change the time that you do it, choose to do things differently, and that will really help. Just a couple more. As you're going through divorce, as I said earlier, it can be really, really stressful. So remember to put the glass down. Now, this little story is about a psychologist who was working with a class and held up a glass of water and said, "How heavy do you think this is?" The students shouted out all sorts of different answers. And the psychologist then said, "Well, actually, it doesn't really matter. It's about how long you have to hold it for. So if you have to hold that glass for a minute, you'll be okay. If you have to hold that glass for an hour, your arm will start to ache. But if you have to hold it up all day, all week, all month, then you're going to be in real pain. So please remember to put the glass down. So remember to look after yourself. Remember that you don't have to think about this divorce all the time. You can almost imagine yourself putting it in a box, putting it away, and thinking, I'm going to worry about that at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning if it's worrying you late at night. Remember to put the glass down. And lastly, you don't have to see the whole staircase right now at the beginning. Just take it one step at a time. One small step every day. And this is a good question you can ask yourself. What's the one small step that I could take today that would take me nearer to the end of this? Those small steps add up to big leaps over time. So my advice is to break everything into chunks and ask what small step you could take right now. And understand that you may not see the end of the journey right now, but it's about taking the next step up the staircase. And another little mantra to end on that always really helps me: you can do anything, but you can't do everything. And you certainly can't do everything all at once. So one step at a time. So I'm just going to stop my share. If I can get the mouse to work. Stop sharing. There we go. Okay.
Thank you very much, Claire. That was really really interesting. Thank you. And I know we've talked before the session about my input and things. So shall I tell you a few of my thoughts that link in with
please do.
and then we can talk. I can answer any questions that we've had sent in.
Brilliant.
I think in relation to the healing cycle and the pathway that people go down during that. From my perspective, when I see a new client getting ready for either divorce or separation, or something might have already happened, or they might be just thinking about whether they want to take any action, I then have to talk to them and assess where they may be on that cycle, and they may be ready to make decisions about things or not ready to make decisions. And one of the first things that I'll be looking at then is there anything that's at risk in relation to financial matters, for instance, or a business, that would make me think that decisions need to be made about something, or can they have that time that they need to be able to do things? So I'll be assessing that. And the other thing as well that I often have to talk to with people is the fact that they may be at different stages of that cycle than the other party.
Yes.
And one of the questions I think we had, Claire, was about what happens if there's an ex-partner or spouse that's not engaging in the process.
Yes.
That may be simply because the fact they haven't reached that stage of their own cycle where they're able to engage in it. Mm-hmm. So sometimes there could be a degree of patience to make sure that person can catch up. But then the flip side of that is they might just be darn right awkward or obstructive to the process. And we need to think about the action that can be taken in both circumstances to help the client through the process.
Yeah, absolutely. That this comes into the point I was making about everybody's divorce being totally different as well, doesn't it? Quite often, if you're the person who has instigated the divorce, the other person might take a while to catch up. You know, and I know from my own experience, once you say that you wanted to separate and you want a divorce, you're way ahead on that journey through that cycle than your partner is. And actually remembering that can help bring some compassion and perhaps into the process as well. I think the question was aimed at or was coming from somebody who was in a position where the ex-partner was just being obstructive.
Sure. So in that case, if we're talking about obstruction of process, as you know, Claire, and the people listening to this may not know, although it has been big in the press, is one of the it's been one of the biggest groundbreaking changes in the divorce law for a long time, in that you don't have to now blame anybody for divorce. They've taken away the fault. What that means is that the other person can't stop you starting the divorce process. There is no, they're not able to defend the divorce petition in the same way as they could. And it means that it gives the person the power to be able to proceed with that part of it. In relation to financial matters, which you can look at as being a separate but linked process, because you can get divorced and not resolve the financial matters, which is very unwise, because those financial matters do not end when a divorce is completed. So it's very, very important to take advice about those financial matters in relation to property, pensions, income, because then I'm there to help advise on the needs that person has got and how assets should be allocated. It can be very complicated, depend on that individual's set up in business, or if there's pensions, or if there's families involved. And on that basis, if somebody is failing to give financial disclosure and the other person is being obstructive about giving information, then you can start a court process that enables us to obtain that information by an order of the court. So ultimately, if somebody is being obstructive, there is always action that you can take.
Yeah, and I mean, I've worked with quite a few clients who have gone down that road of putting the court process in place in order to get some deadlines. And actually that can sometimes bring the other party to the table, can't it?
It can.
Once you start, you can settle before you get to hearings.
And we always hope that you can settle at any time. So if the court process is started, and an agreement is reached, then brilliant. The whole hope is that you don't need to use the court process, and you hope that, although it may be difficult emotionally, that you can engage in some kind of negotiation together together on your own, or with the help of your solicitors, or with the help of mediation. But if you can't, then that's where that assistance is required. And sometimes people do try their best to be as patient as possible, but they're waiting and waiting and waiting. And actually, you've got no choice but to start the court process, because you'd just be waiting forever, which isn't satisfactory, because nobody can move on. And if you're the person that is much further down the healing scale, you may feel that actually you are ready and you need to be able to move forward with your life.
Yeah, absolutely. So Lauren, I think, I mean, I see lots of clients who are really confused about the whole divorce process, and I always say to them that there are three strands to it. There's the dissolution of the marriage, there's the financial settlement, and then there's any arrangements that you have around children. So some divorces will have those three strands, some will only have two if there are no children. And you know, I think that that's a common misunderstanding. That all you need is fill in the forms and dissolve the marriage, but actually there's more to it than that.
Yeah, that's the bit that people do need to be aware of. As I said, that the divorce part can be freestanding, so you can have that part on its own. You can't conclude financial matters in relation to a marriage unless the divorce part has been started first. There's interim things that can be done, which isn't for today's topic to discuss, but I always talk about that with people. In very simple terms, you can put interim agreements in place, but ultimately until the divorce process is concluded, you can't have a final order of divorce until then. Years and years ago, as part of the divorce process, you used to have arrangements for children included within the applications that you made to the court. That has now become totally separate, and it's not good practice to mix discussions about the arrangements for children with the discussions with arrangements about the finances. However, the reality is they are linked. So again, if there isn't an agreement in respect of where children are going to live, or when they're going to see parents, or if there's difficulties with holidays, or if one parent's not keeping the other parent up to date with medical issues and things like that, then there is action that can be taken in respect of the children. And again, the court is there as a help to those families. I always think, I mean, I've been qualified now for I think 18 years, and people have this fear of the court, and of course they see things on telly, which is usually criminal courtrooms, and I always give that kind of comfort that I hope that by explaining that it's a judge that is there to help resolve a family matter in his chambers, which is a room, not in a courtroom like you see on the telly. And my experience is that they are there and are very helpful in helping resolve matters. And it's designed to be a much more user-friendly system than it used to be. Sadly, with the chaos that COVID has caused, the courts do have, and I know this, I think Claire, was one of the questions we had, how long do things take to resolve?
Yes.
The divorce part itself is very fixed because the number of weeks is fixed, but the bit that is the unknown is how long would it take to resolve financial matters if there needs to be the court process. And that's the bit that the court is very overworked, understaffed, and that there sadly more and more court hearings and things are being cancelled at the moment. So again, it's good to get that timetable in place, but there has to be an awareness that there could be a lot of time due to those constraints. But again, there's other things that we can consider, such as collaborative law, where the solicitors agree things, the solicitors and both the couple agree things together. But also there's been a new system of private court work where a barrister, usually, who sometimes would sit as a judge, is employed privately to act as a judge, and you can control your own timetable much better. So there's definitely being developments in that area. Sometimes it's a good thing that a bit of time passes, because that does give that, especially if there is an issue to do with income, or if the children are getting a bit older, so that might not necessarily be a bad thing, but sometimes there may be a reason why things need to be dealt with quickly.
Yeah. The other question that's kind of related to that was how much divorce costs. And I know that the answer to that really is how long is a piece of string.
Yeah, it's very it's easier for me to talk about the costs of the divorce part itself, and we're talking just very distinctly about the divorce process. And I think that was one of the questions we had in as well, Claire, that was about doing the divorce yourself.
Yes,
so the actual
on our own.
Yeah, the actual divorce part of it can either be, as I said, a sole application made, or it can be a joint application that you can decide together, both of you are going to put your name on it. The end result isn't any different, but it's designed to be amicable. And actually a lot of people do say, well, we both think this marriage has ended. So it's just a way of being able to keep that collaborative nature of what it is you're doing. And the court fee is £593. And if you have a person that is able and capable to fill out a form, then there's a couple of things I normally would want to talk to the person about. But a lot of people are going to be perfectly capable of doing that divorce part themselves to save a bit of money on legal fees.
Yeah.
The bit that is money well spent is the resolution of the financial matters, particularly if you have got one person that may be more aware of the finances, or they may be the person that's always organised things. And that's the bit where there's not a standard document that deals with the resolution of the financial matters. And that's where our expertise in drafting and making sure whatever agreements and protections might be needed for the person are put in place.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got quite a few of my clients at the moment have filled in the paperwork for the dissolution of the marriage part, the divorce part themselves. And they're talking with solicitor and negotiating with the help of solicitor.
Yeah. And I always say I've been saying to people since the new law came in to go on to the government website and have a look at it. I'm not trying to do myself out of helping people, or I don't want people to think that we're not there to do it if they'd like us to, because some people would like to. But it is a user-friendly system. And from the perspective of joint applications, it's put solicitors in a slightly grey area, because we're really meant to only advise one client, although there is movements towards how it might translate into being able to advise people together. But of course, for obvious reasons, we have to be a bit careful about that, because what's advice to one client might not be the right advice to the other person. Hence, you have a negotiation about how finances should be resolved.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so the other questions that we had, the first one was, what do I need to think about when I'm contacting the solicitor at the beginning of this journey? What kind of questions should I ask, and what are the important things to look out for?
So the way that we operate when we see a new client is, first of all, we may or may not have had a brief introductory telephone chat with that client. And then we, if it's a financial case, we usually will ask the client before the meeting to fill out a questionnaire that we use, so that prompts the client into what information that I need. And it's a checklist of the different finances, the history of where money might have come from, and also a history of the relationship when it started, and anything about children, anything to do with anybody's health. So that's our just initial way of gathering information. But I do say to people, please do not worry ahead of the meeting. It can be a little bit daunting to think that there'll be questions you might not be able to answer, and you might not be able to answer at that stage. So to please not worry about it, but to just start thinking about finances, so that I can then start addressing where people might be living. Is there any pensions issues and things like that?
Yeah. Okay. And is there anything in particular that I ought to perhaps take along to that first meeting?
I always think that it's helpful to bring a notepad so that you can jot things down if you'd like to. Our offices are open to see people with face-to-face meetings now. A lot of people are still choosing to have the consultation on video calls, because it depending on work commitments and commitments with children, that could be easier. I'm more than happy to do whatever's best and most suitable for the client. Some people ask if they can bring somebody with them, and that's absolutely fine. The only thing I say about that is to make sure that you can talk openly in front of that person, and there not be any embarrassment or anything that I might be asking questions about money or personal matters that they might want to share things with me that they then think, well, I don't want that other person to hear. So other than that, I'm perfectly happy, because sometimes that can be a good thing. If you're feeling a bit apprehensive or stressed, it can be easy to forget things. However, we also follow up that initial meeting with a letter which summarises the discussion, because we're conscious of the fact that it can be a lot of information and an emotional time.
Absolutely.
So it's to not worry that you've forgotten something, because it will be in the letter afterwards.
I absolutely remember that from the first time round. I took my dad along to my initial meeting with my solicitor, and I only remember one sentence from the meeting, but he wrote notes. Actually, interesting, the one sentence that I remember was, "In your position, you don't need to do anything right now. You can wait until you're ready," which was the best advice that has been given.
And there's never any pressure. So sometimes I see a client for an initial consultation and they straight away would like to move on to the next stage, like the next day. Sometimes people want to take a bit of time to think about it, and it could be a few weeks or months. But also I've had a couple of clients only recently that I saw a year ago. Because actually you never know, circumstances, whatever's happening in your life, or obviously it's been difficult times with COVID as well. So you must not feel any pressure. And if a solicitor, or if people listening to this have got solicitors and they're feeling any kind of pressure, then something's gone wrong, I would say, in that chain of communications. There shouldn't be. We're here to help you, not cause additional pressure or stresses, is my view, as in we are very keen to make sure that people understand that we're there to help. And I consider myself to be very approachable and open to whatever conversations need to be had. And if you're feeling like you can't consult or confide in your solicitor, then that might not be the right person for you. I
always say to my clients that it's really important that they feel comfortable with their solicitor, because they're probably going to spend quite a lot of time talking to them. So it's really important that you feel a rapport, and you feel comfortable in their presence, and that you can share anything that you need to with them.
And sometimes things are bumpy along the way, and you may need to be able to have some quite frank conversations, and also about costs, as in I sometimes have to have some difficult conversations with clients because they're asking about costs. And I'm always happy for anybody to ask me anything they want to, because it's important that things are understood, and we're only human. I remember once somebody asked me a question about a bill, and I'd made a human error of when I'd entered something twice, and I was horrified about it, but they were able to ask me about it, and I straight away rectified it. So sometimes if you have anything that you need to be able to talk openly about, anything that needs talking about is my view. Absolutely.
And I think going back to a previous point you were making about, sometimes you see somebody, let's say you might see them now and then they might not come back until early next year or even later. Sometimes that's sometimes where I can step in and help. Ready for that point to be able to say, actually, now I'm ready to press go on this, and I'm ready to move forward. So whether you're the person who has been left or whether you're the person who's doing the leaving, sometimes even if you're the person who wants to leave, you aren't quite ready to press go. And I know that in my second divorce I made the decision, but it wasn't for another 6 or 7 months that I actually initiated any divorce process at all. It doesn't have to be,
no, absolutely not. And I think you hit the nail on the head with the word clarity. Clarity and knowledge. By coming and having a consultation with us, with me or one of my team, means that you can get an understanding of the process, even if you're not ready to action that understanding.
Absolutely.
And a lot of people I see say straight away that it kind of took the weight off their shoulders understanding that.
Absolutely, because I think there's a fear around the very word divorce until you understand the process that it is. It can be quite a scary thing to think about. So, just because you go and see a solicitor to get advice doesn't mean you're going to have to take action the next day. You have to get advice, sit on it until you're ready to do something about it. Or in fact, you may never do anything about it, and that's also okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And the other thing I wanted to just mention as well is you were talking about energy vampires. And I think this is always a really difficult topic, and I know we've talked about it before, Claire, and I expect we'll probably revisit this and boundaries and dealing with other relationships that may be within your family, not just obviously the relationship that's ended. But I've read a very good book called Dodging Energy Vampires. And there's some really helpful bits in there about habits and people and their effect on you. And as you said, making those decisions about how, whether it's causing you more stress than the advice they're giving that you don't want to take, but you might feel obliged to. And that's a really, really tough position to be in with all relationships have demands and things of different kinds. And it's just navigating that maybe as tactfully and as amicably as you can, but to think about your own well-being as the utmost thing.
Absolutely. And when you're going through this process, putting yourself at the top of the pile is really imperative. So, you know, all those cliches about you can't pour from an empty cup and putting your own oxygen mask on first. If there's any arena in which those become really important, it's this one. Looking after yourself while you're going through a breakup or a separation. And
sometimes it's maybe using the word sad doesn't quite fit, but when a romantic relationship ends, a marriage, or if you're cohabiting with someone, often other relationships linked to that also end. Yes. And it's you're grieving that loss as well in the same way as the healing process. And again, time, the cliche of time does heal. I find in my own personal experiences, but also with the clients I see, that is true. It just but you have to give yourself the time to work through that process.
I think when you get to the end of it and you look back as well, it's really quite interesting to see how many new people have come into your life as well. You know, it's not just, and this is probably a good place to finish, going through a divorce is not a slamming door and ending. It's also an opening door into something different, something new. And I know right at the beginning, that's really hard to grasp hold of, or sometimes can be really hard to grasp hold of. But there is life after this. And when you look back in 10, 20 years' time, this will be a moment in time in your life. And it may be like me, there's a before my first divorce and an after my first divorce. But actually what's come after, although it felt like the end of the world at the time, what's come after has been fantastic in many, many ways. And there are lots of opportunities. So I think that's probably a good place to close, to say that, you know, this doesn't have to be the end. It can be the beginning of something really amazing if you take some of the opportunities that come your way during and beyond this process. So there is absolutely hope, and there is absolutely a bright future. And that concludes, I think, for today. All that remains to say is that next time we'll meet on the 13th of October, which is a Thursday as well, and we'll be talking about surviving the early days of your divorce or your separation. And we'll be joined with Lev next time from Ian Walker. So all that remains for me to do is to say thank you very much, Lauren, and thank you very much to everybody who's come along. And we will see you next time.